Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Michael Harris. I'm a professor in the Simmons School and also the director of the Center for Teaching Excellence. And we thank all of you for joining us. We're really excited about our speaker today, Claire Major, who some of you may remember. 2019, we were just joking. It's hard to believe that that was our last in-person teaching effectiveness symposium. Was fall of 2019. We had no idea what was on our way in 2020. Claire was our speaker for that, and as she and I were having a conversation, she graciously agreed to join us for the session today, and we're thrilled to have her here. Just a kind of a quick background before I turn things over to her. Claire is a professor of higher education at the University of Alabama. Her research looks into college teaching, pedagogy, faculty work, and really, I think to me, what Claire really brings into her work and in all of her books and all of her research, all of her talks, which she does all over the country, is really blending this research-based understanding of college teaching with the really practical, tactical things that faculty need to do in the classroom. And I think that was talking to many of you whose names I see on the list there who were here at TES last when she was here. That's what you found, and I think you'll find in the session today. You're going to get a lot of that. Everything Claire really puts out there is research-based, and what we know is really going to work in the classroom. And I think given everything we went through in the fall and are going to continue to go through in the spring, that's going to be really useful. So without further ado, Claire, thanks for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for inviting me. I am delighted to be here. It feels so different being on the computer with you instead of being there with you in person, but it's a great opportunity to connect and think about some of the stuff I really, really enjoy thinking about and talking about and discussing with others. So what we're going to talk about today is engaging college students using active learning techniques. As Michael said, I am a professor at the University of Alabama. That's my Twitter handle, in case you want to connect later. That's me in my hair in the before times. I thought you might need to see that just to know what you're missing out on. Like Michael said, this is not my first rodeo at SMU talking about active learning. I was here in August, right? In the before times, right at the start of the year before things went down. And what we talked about then was active learning strategies that engage and improve learning outcomes. And we looked at research findings that connect, okay, we know that if we do these things, it can lead to improved learning outcomes. At least the literature says that. And we covered 7 principles that show up in the research about active learning that are shown to, in fact, improve learning outcomes. And I know some of you were here before. I'm kind of curious, if you were here before, could you hit your reaction button so I can see who you are? Yeah, I see some hands up there. Okay, great. I can't see your names for some reason, but I see hands, and yeah, that's great. I'm so happy to be back with you. But some of the things we talked about that are definitely linked to improving learning outcomes are guiding student preparation for class, helping them prepare because they don't always know how to do that. Asking them to think about something that they've learned recently so that they're ready for the new information to come. Chunking information into manageable units. And that one is particularly important right now when we're teaching online and high flex situations. That becomes even more pressing. Helping students pay attention. I think that's another one that's essential right now when so much is going on to distract them. The world's on fire, right? How do I focus on my learning? Thinking about active and collaborative learning as well. Establishing a clear instructor presence is linked to improved outcome, and you're using learning assessment as a tool. So those are some of the things we talked about last time. So what are we going to do this time? That's a good question. So one of the things I wanted to do is revisit what is active learning. and what does it mean in practice. And then I want to talk about 3 challenges to active learning that I think are in particular important right now during all this going on. And then think about techniques that we can use to help address those challenges. So a few details for our session today. We have some guided notes. I think Michael sent those out as a handout ahead of time. Could you give me a thumbs up if you've seen those? Okay, I see most of you giving me a thumbs up. If you haven't seen them, check your email. They should be there for you to use. It's just an open set of notes that I hope will help you follow along with some of the main things we're talking about today. I'm going to ask you to put your questions in the chat box. I'm told that they actually turned off the talking. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure that you can talk to me directly. Maybe you can, but I'm told you can't. So if you have questions, please do put them in the chat box. I'll stop a few times during our session today to take a couple of questions, and then I will stay after the session to help address any of the ones that we don't get to. All right, I will also show you, when talking about specific techniques, pictures of videos. Those videos are available at the Cross Academy. That's kpcrossacademy.org. I'm not going to play the videos today. I'm just going to say this is a good technique, try it out. So if you want to try out or check out that technique further, there's a video and also a downloadable template that has additional information about how to do the technique, step-by-step instructions, an example of how it's been done in a class before. So those will probably go by pretty fast. So heads up, that's where they're from. You can get more detail later. The Cross Academy, I just want to mention, is something that Elizabeth and Barkley and I developed in part to honor Kay Patricia Cross, who was a 20th century thought leader. She's still alive. She's not working anymore, though, and she wrote Classroom Assessment Techniques, which is a wonderful book of formative assessment techniques. If you haven't checked it out, you probably have a copy in the library or could get one on a pretty good deal on Amazon. But this is one of my favorite quotes from Pat, and she says, "Teaching without learning is just talking." And I think that's so true, and it can kind of set the stage for some of the things that we're talking about today. How do we help students learn? How do we help them be active in their learning and be good participants in it? Okay, so with all that introductory stuff, let's get started. So I want to take a minute and ask you, how do you define learning? And I'm going to ask you to write it down. You can write it in your guided notes, but I'd also love for you to post it in the chat with us. So your definition of learning. All right, they're starting to come in fast now. These are fabulous definitions: interpreting and applying information, engaged, attaching the unknown to the known, gaining new information. It's not necessarily utilitarian, it's getting toward understanding, another understanding, new knowledge and skills, discovering something new that can be applied Wonderful, wonderful definitions. I can't even read them all, but they are so good. I think we can get a transcript of this afterwards, so we should do that because these are fabulous, fabulous definitions. Creating knowledge through interaction. So much good stuff here. Shifting or changing a student knowledge, internalizing information. Fabulous, fabulous stuff. I just want to take these and do research on them because I'm a research nerd. Very exciting qualitative data there. Such good information. When I think about learning, and I think this incorporates all of what you were saying, I think about learning as a process that leads to change of some kind. It could be, if you're old school, a change in behavior. It could be a change in knowledge, foundational knowledge. It could be a change in your understanding. It could be a change in how you view the world. I think of learning as being about change. And that's what we do as teachers. We think about how to help students change. So how does learning happen? I'm going to ask you again to take just a minute to write, how do you think learning happens for you or your students? How do you think people learn? Take a minute, write it on your paper, and also please post it to the chat room so we have more of your great thoughts. Gwendolyn beat me in there, even through interaction. Practice application, integrating knowledge. Yes, all these are so good. Sharing, helping them want to know happens when you make it relatable. Understanding, applying. I see a lot of applying, repetition. Absolutely, all of those things. Had to apply them in my first job. Yeah. When you apply things, you do own them at a different level. And when we teach stuff, we own it at a different level. Seeing the need through for learning through experience and practice, experience, reading, listening, and watching, problem solving, examples, all of these things. These are wonderful, again, wonderful, wonderful responses. Thank you for sharing your thoughts here. A couple of things I think about when I think about learning. I think, at least in part, it involves moving things from short-term to long-term memory. And I think about how that happens. And I think there are three things that, when I think about the process, how I think about it is in the context of like starting your own library, right? It starts if you have a library that doesn't have maybe much stuff. Nobody comes with a completely empty room, right? But when you first start to build a library, someone may hand you a book, right? And say, here's a book. And one of the first things you're going to do is take that book and open the book and flip through the book and try to determine what kind of book this is. Is it a recipe book? Is it a fiction book? Is it a comic book? What is this thing that you have been handed? And that's the process of encoding, right? You're encoding information when you get it. I've got new information. Let me think about what it is. Let me apply what I already know. Let me think about where it fits within my existing schema, like we talked about last time. How am I going to take that information in? The next thing I think that happens during our move to memory is a process of organizing the information. It's consolidating it. It's like, okay, now I've got this book. Where am I going to put this book? Is this book, should it go with the fiction book? Should it go with the recipe book? Should it go over here with the reference book? Should it go with the art books? Where am I going to put this information to store it? And that's a process called consolidation. We're taking information and we're owning it and we're organizing it and we're fitting it into our existing memory structures. And the last part that I think happens is the process of, we've got to use that information, right? We've got to pull it back out of there and do something with it. And this is a process of retrieval. Yeah, I've got to make a soup. Maybe I better go get that recipe book. I've got to build a shed. Maybe I better get that book on building and figure it out. So we think about how we're going to use that information when we pull it back out. And that's where, a lot of you were talking about retrieval and practice. That's where that information comes in. We're using it in some way. We've had to go get it and bring it out and use it in a new way. All right, I'm going to ask you, how do you define active learning? And I'm going to give you a heads up that my next question is going to be, how do you define active learning techniques? Because I think there's a difference between active learning and active learning strategies, right? Those two things in my mind are different things. So I'm going to ask you to consider them separately. How do you define active learning? And how do you define active learning techniques? And I'm going to ask you to share again because I love hearing from you. I want to know you're out there. I can see you, and I'm so thankful to see so many of you with your cameras on. Those of you who don't, it's absolutely fine. I don't mind. It's especially the ones of you with the smiling pictures. Those are great. And the little dinosaur looking thing, that's awfully cute too. Okay, active learning versus active learning. How about we do active learning first? Active learning is multi-sensory. When all the students are agents of their learning, when students are invested in the learning process, engaged learning, y'all are just right on my same team. This is great. Two-way, okay, that's great. That's great. All right, there we go. Having to struggle. Engaging with material involves students in thought. That is my class assistant, Wasabi, thank you. Okay, that's an unusual answer.
Well, that's the dinosaur, the dinosaur's name.
Oh, and you didn't talk to me. They said you couldn't talk to me. I'm delighted to hear you. That's so great. Okay, engaging and pressure. Okay, taking students through real life experiences. All these are absolutely wonderful. All right, let's go ahead and write out your answers for active learning techniques. And I'm going to say, don't post them yet. Type your response into chat. We'll do what's called a chat waterfall. So I will tell you when to post. Go ahead and type out your answer. And then I'll say post, and they'll all post at once, and we'll get kind of a waterfall feeling just for a little bit, mixing it up, I guess. Trying something a little different. All right, 219, let's take just a minute for you to compose your answer. All right, let's post. Everybody hit go at once. Whoa, look at them go. That's always so exciting for me. I'm a nerd. What can I do? Look at all those great answers. On-the-job training, entrance and exit tickets, applying new stuff in practical ways, structured problems, learning buy-in, talking, writing, case studies, very specific techniques, ethical dilemmas, discussions, flipping the classroom, research projects, asking questions. These are all great. Well, I hope you're doing it right now, Karen. I want you to be. So that's great. Case studies, group work. Oh, these are fabulous. I think Linda, you've been to the Cross Academy, I hope. If you haven't been, check us out. We have some videos about these things. Showing stories that are happening in the world. Oh my gosh, right now, right, Lee? There's so much going on. When students actually gets their hands dirty, drafting and revising, writing, and so on. These are wonderful, wonderful responses. Okay. So, okay, let me get back to there we go. I think of active learning as the level of mental effort students put into their learning. I think You know, you can kind of be there in spirit, but I think you have to really invest some cognitive energy into learning to be learning actively. There has to be some intellectual effort there on the parts of students. Now, they have to be willing to do it, and that's a little bit of a motivation thing going on there. But I think to really actively learn, there has to also be that cognitive investment. It can't just be fun and yes, I'm willing, but they then have to push on the gas, turn on the juice, whatever metaphor you want to use, and actually get that mental, intellectual effort into their learning for it to be active learning. So active learning techniques, as I said, to me are something different. So my definition about this is they're activities that teachers use in order to help students engage in active learning. So I think we like to think, well, they're motivated or they're not, right? They're investing that intellectual effort or they're not. But I think there are things that we can do as instructors to help them invest more effort. And I think that's part of our jobs. How do we help them go in from, yeah, I'm kind of working at it, I'm doing my best, to really getting in there and digging in and doing what they can to learn. So I guess what I'm saying is I think active learning techniques are the way that we can help promote and motivate active learning on the part of students. So here's a question. I think I don't know that I have it. I don't have it actually, but some people have asked me, are some techniques better than others for promoting active learning? And if you came and hung out with me this summer, you know that I personally don't believe so, right? I hear a lot of people saying, oh, lectures are passive learning. I don't think that has to be the case. I think it can be the case. I think students can be passive in a lecture, but I don't think they have to be. You know, just like they can be active when they're problem solving, but they don't have to be very active when they problem solve. You know, I'm not a super good math person. You know, I'll just put it out there. But when I solve a problem, something like 2 + x = 5, it is not that much mental effort for me to do that kind of problem. It just doesn't require that much intellectual effort from me. So I'm not very active when I'm doing that. Another one of my favorite Pat Cross quotes, and I believe I shared this one with you last time, but I believe it bears repeating, is so good. Passive learning is an oxymoron. There is no such thing. If you have learned, you have been active. There is no way to passively learn. If that change has happened, it is my full belief that there has been activity. I think there can be more or less activity on any given thing, right? They can more or less invest in any task that you give them. So you can give them a lecture and they can kind of listen, or they can really invest in listening. You can give them a problem and they can kind of solve it, or they can really invest themselves in solving it. So any task that we give them can require lower or higher levels of activity. Our job is getting students or helping them get to those higher levels, or at least part of our job. And so in my example here, if I have a low level of effort, x + 2 = 5, the answer is 3, right? But if I'm going a little harder at it, I say, well, it's an algebra problem, and the answer is 3. Or I can say it's an algebra problem. I need to work on my math facts because I'm not that great at them. I need to brush up so I can go faster, so I can do the algebra problems. Then I'm getting a little higher. The same thing with listening. I can just sit here and listen, or I can try to make sure I'm paying attention, like you can do right now. You can listen to me and go on with your life, maybe check your email, or you can really try to understand and formulate questions about it. Or you can say, I'm really trying to get there. let me try to understand what she's saying. Let me try to get where I agree and where I disagree. Maybe I also need to monitor my own attention and make sure I put my phone down and make sure I am really focused and staying on point and on message. And I know it's super hard to do, and it's really even harder in Zoom, right? So those are the kinds of things that our students are doing right now too. So I think whatever kind of task you give them, they can do a low level of effort or they can do a higher level of effort. And what we do as teachers can help them move from lower to higher efforts. So active learning, I don't think of as one task or one technique, but it's something we can do. We can use those tasks and techniques to help students be more active. All right, so another question for you. I want to ask you what you think are some of the biggest challenges to active learning students are experiencing right now, right? I mean, it's hard in any time period, but I believe it's especially hard for students right now. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think they face some unique challenges right now that make it more challenging for them to really give that intellectual effort, to be that invested. So I'm going to ask you to write in the chat. Some of you are already going. That's great. What you think of as the biggest challenge. Oh, y'all are all over this. Look at this. Distractions, time management, and fatigue. Zoom fatigue, time management and fatigue, distractions. Let's see. I'm trying to, my cursor's going bonkers over here. I don't know. I think I have cold hands, and so my fingers aren't wanting to connect with my pad there. Loss of teacher control, competing goals, grades, lack of motivation, time, COVID, missing out on the side talk, decreased attention span, all of these, grade anxiety, intimidation, no practice, self-consciousness, lack of prior knowledge, tired of being away from classmates. Yes, right? Interaction, day-on-day distractions, stress, social media. Learning is fatiguing everyone, already tired. Yes. Inability to see facial expressions in the high flex. Yes, when you're masked or even when you're on Zoom and the lighting's not perfect. Wow, y'all got a lot of these. And I'm laughing because it's sad and true, and we're all coping right now, overwhelmed, them and us. Am I right? Right? Personal and career worries, time zone fatigue, aversion to risk, online community, lack of structure, all the things. Missing out on the body language, all of the things. There's so much going on right now. Yeah, right. It's hard for people to learn right now. It's for people to teach right now, but it's also hard for them to learn. You know, I talk to some of my students and I hear their stories and I think, you know, one thing I can't say is that they're not motivated because they are in school still while all of this is going on. And my students, while working full-time jobs and raising children, dealing with sick parents or sick friends, and also still maintaining their schoolwork. So it's pretty impressive that they're still carrying on. And I think it's important to recognize some of their challenges. And we could spend a whole session, Michael, you might have to have me back to talk about some more of these challenges. Today, we're going to talk about 3 ones that I think are kind of common to active learning. And I think in particular right now, there's some challenges. One is insufficient motivation, and that is not to put that on them. I mean, I think, again, with the world situation right now, and also I think it's on part for us to help motivate them too. So that is not students are bad, they're not motivated. It is just the reality. And I'm going to unpack how I see motivation a little bit more, but just to say from the start, I don't mean to point a finger at students. That's not what that's about, as you'll see. Limited working memory, I think, is another one. And then lack of deep processing skills, right? Okay, so I'm going to break these down a little bit at a time, and be prepared to hang in there with me and do a few activities along the way. So motivation, I think of as an open attitude toward completing the task. It's enthusiasm, willingness, vigor, and dedication. That is that emotional aspect, if they're willing to get in there and try to invest that intellectual effort. There are a lot of theories about motivation. One of them is the behaviorist model. Y'all know the Skinner's rats and the pressing for food. Students are in fact motivated by grades. They really are. And so I think we still have a lot of behaviorist motivation in our curriculum, right? There's a movement toward ungrading and stuff like that. I love that theory. I can't go there yet, not with my students at my institutions. I love it in theory, and I hope it catches on. We're not there yet, so I'm not to ungrading, but grades do motivate students. The problem with this kind of model, though, is students can lose focus on the learning. They're too focused on the carrot or the stick, right? The grades, they're too focused on that to be actually focused on the learning. There's also the needs model view of learning. Y'all have seen Maslow's hierarchy, I'm sure, dozens of times before, where they start off with those physiological needs that must be met. Water, warmth, safety is next, rest, safety is next, belongingness and love and esteem, and then self-actualization. So they have to have all these needs met, and there's a hierarchy. There's a lot of criticism about this model. I've never loved this model, to be perfectly honest with you. I am starting to have more appreciation for it. I learned recently that a lot of students, even at the University of Alabama, have food insecurity. Like about 35% of our students, who seem pretty affluent to me, are, not all of them, but a lot of them seem fairly affluent. They're food insecure, right? It's really hard to focus on your learning when you're hungry. It just is, right? So the other thing is, with COVID, people are sick or their relatives are sick, right? And students are so focused on that it's really hard for them to get in and focus on the learning instead of, their situation, the public health situation, and a lot of times their own personal situation. So I am starting to have more appreciation for that one. There's also a contemporary model, a two factors model, and that's the idea that valuing the learning, and expectancy, expecting to succeed, can lead to motivation. So breaking those down a bit, value, they can have value about what they're learning. And, I teach right now doctoral students who tend to, on the whole, value, they're there for a purpose by the time they're in doc students. I've taught freshman composition for a bunch of years, and in that class, they didn't always value the learning. I can say I never met a student who really felt they needed that class. So they always would say things like, oh, I learned to write in high school, or I'm going to be an engineer, so I really don't have to write, or I clept out of, I just don't test well, so I should have clept, but I didn't. But anyway, maybe it's just me, but they don't always value what they're learning. Sometimes they do. And that's one thing we can do as teachers, is to give them some choice and some opportunities to study what they will value. The other thing is valuing how they're learning, right? And a lot of us who are teaching fully online are really getting that right now, because they may not always appreciate that. Some of mine love it, and some of mine absolutely say they just don't learn well in this kind of situation, that it's just not as good. So, they may want to lecture. Some of them love lecture. Some of them hate lecture. Some of them love learning online. Some of them hate learning online. So there's so many things about how they're learning that can change that. The next factor of motivation is expectancy. And they have to believe that they're going to succeed, right? In order to value the learning, to invest the effort. They have to believe their effort is going to improve performance. They have to believe performance is going to lead to the rewards that they want. And then the rewards have to satisfy their goals. It may not be enough, to just get the grade. They may want something that can help them in the future, or it may not be enough to help them be better citizens. They may actually want the grades, right? So it depends. They have to do the rewards. So I want to take a minute and think about how value and expectancy work together. I'm going to ask you to do a poll first. The poll is this: which students do you most often have in your course? Students in group 1 who don't value the task and don't expect to succeed. Group 2 don't value the task and do expect to succeed. Group 3 do value the task but don't expect to succeed. Or group 4 do value the task and do expect to succeed. I'm going to launch this poll right now and ask you to give it a vote. Which group do you have the most of in your class? Okay, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. And in the poll, my cold fingers are making me laugh. Okay, so y'all seem to have a lot of doesn't value the task, but do expect to succeed. Y'all, that is, in my mind, the hardest of these groups to work with. Absolutely, without a question, because if they, and I know these people, I have them too, right? They did well in high school. I'm a straight A student. Of course I'm going to do well. I should get an A because I've gotten core A's in all my other courses, right? But they don't really love what you're asking them to do. That is a hard group to work with. I'm not going to lie to you. But look at all you on the number 4s. That's a great second grouping, right? Number 1s, none of you have that, and lucky. That is wonderful. Those students are very hard to reach, I find. If they just don't think they can do it and don't expect to succeed, it's a hard thing for them to do. If they, number 3, those are easy to have. Only 2 of y'all have the most of those. But anyway, we all have a mix, I'm sure, but I am so jealous of the 2 of you who have the do value the task, and the 3s and 4s. Y'all got it great. The number 2s, hang in there. Keep trying to show them the value. All right, thank you. I'm going to get back to this. So here's what the research says can happen when you have each of these groups. In that group 1, you can expect resistance, rejection, resentment, and anger at being coerced into this thing that they can't possibly succeed at. That's why that group is hard. Number 2, evasion, does the minimum, attention drifts, competing interests. I see some of you nodding. Yes, you know these particular students, right? Number 3, does value the task, doesn't expect to succeed, makes excuses, pretends to understand, denies difficulties. That can be the real challenge, reaching those particular students if they don't let you know what's going on. And they're so focused on protecting the ego. And last, are they're engaged and happy to focus on developing the skill. So hopefully we all get number 4s going on. So what can you do about motivation? For value, you can build it into your task. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. Talk to them about why it's important, state the value, the goals, how it will help them in their future. You can give them choice and task. There are different kinds of things that you can do to build in value. Expectancy, I think some things where you help them build it, right? Giving them multiple quizzes instead of one big final test so they can see some smaller successes along the way and build their confidence goes a great way toward helping that. So a few teaching techniques that can help. These are ones at the Cross Academy where you can learn more information. One is a digital story where students talk about their own personal experiences and how they connect to the class. I have had wonderful luck with this. Students really dive in and embrace it and really want to share their lives and make those connections. So I think that's a great one for building value. 3-minute message. I've also had great success with these. It's kind of like the 3-minute thesis where they present their own research or argument. They may get to have one slide that they can share and just do a 3-minute thing. I do these in my online classes. So they have to have super short videos where they talk to each other and present their message. It allows them to share a passion or an interest. And another one to help with the expectancy is test-taking teams where they study as a group. And then they may take the test as an individual, and then they take the test as a group, and you kind of average out the grades. You may give like an 80% for the individual test and a 20% for the group test, but that helps build confidence as well. All right, so I'll take any questions that you have. I think please write them into the chat. Michael is, I think, taking questions. So I think we'll do maybe 2 right now because I still have a few things to get to. Right.
And I have one, Claire, maybe while people are adding maybe some others in. This one Suzanne asked a bit ago, but I think it's still relevant. How would you define the difference between gimmicky active learning and meaningful active learning techniques?
Well, I would never do gimmicky ones, right? I would say you have to have a reason, a learning goal for using the technique. And if you don't have a goal for it, don't use it, right? So I think any kind of active learning technique can have a place, but you need to make sure that it fits within the context of your class and your particular group of students and your institution and your subject matter. So something that might work for me in freshman composition may not be the greatest thing for my doc level course, you know? So I think it's just trying to figure out what works best. So I would say don't do one just to do it. Don't do active learning technique just for active learning technique's sake. Make sure that the learning goal requires it, and make sure that the task you're having to do it helps them build the skill, right? If you want them to be able to write critically, choose a technique where they focus on writing and so forth.
Great. And then kind of another one, a little more on the tactical side of things. Some of the activities you were just showing, are those graded? Are they in class, outside of class? How do you think about these when you're doing kind of designing class and particularly with grades?
I think that's a great question. I grade everything. I mean, I grade everything. If I want them to do it, it's getting a grade. It may not get a huge grade. It may be 5 points in the greater scheme of thing, but there's rarely a thing, you know, or maybe this is your participation grade or something like that. In class, out of class, for me, has honestly lost a little bit of meaning during this COVID time. I'm like, how am I going to answer that? A lot of things, I would say some of those I would do outside of class, and some of them I would do inside of class. I'm trying to remember which ones I just showed you. Test-taking teams, I might assign them to study in class. I would probably do that one in class, give them a few minutes to study if I had in class, but if I were doing a Zoom, I would put them in breakout rooms. And if I were doing online, I would give them different discussion threads. And then I've forgotten the other ones I just showed you already. I'm sorry. But you know, there are a lot of things you can have them do outside of class and then be ready for in-class activities. But then I do a lot of active learning in class when I'm on site as well. Okay, I'm letting my cat in so she doesn't start meowing. Okay, sorry for leaving.
It's not a COVID Zoom if there's not a cat.
That's
sign.
right, that's right. She's not gonna jump up here, I don't think, but she was gonna meow at you. Okay, I'm gonna keep going because we have just a few minutes left. Michael saved the rest of them and we'll do them at the end, okay? Okay, cognitive load, one of my favorite things to think about. I love cognitive load. It really helped me understand the way students think and how their working memory works. So, and I'm going to tell it to you in my layman's term. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an ed psychologist. I'm a former English major who studies now higher education, right? So cognitive load is the total amount of mental effort used in working memory. So all students have this available amount of mental effort. Some have more than others, right? But there is a limited supply of what each student has for this mental effort. And then there are three kinds of cognitive load. And I think of them as pulling against that mental effort, right? So they've got this thing here, and then this load stuff is taking away from their mental effort, their ability to function and process and think and learn. So one of those kinds of loads is intrinsic load. And that is simply how difficult or easy a specific concept is. All of us who teach know that some of our stuff is simply easier to understand and learn than others. And there are some concepts or knowledge bits or facts or processes that are just harder to grasp than others, right? It's like arithmetic is easier than algebra. There are just some things that are more difficult than other things in any given class. So here's a quick demonstration of that. I want you to write something. You're going to need a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper, or you can type it. So you're just going to need to write it down. I'm going to ask you to read the following letters. Don't write while you're reading. Just read and try to remember. You're going to have 3 seconds, and I am going to time it on my timer. So I will show it to you. Just read it. Try to remember what you read, and then I'm going to give you a time to write it down. Okay. Okay, from memory, write down or type out what you just saw. Okay, we're going to do the same thing again. Again, you will have 3 seconds. Just read, don't write right now. Just read and try to remember what you're seeing. Oops, sorry. Okay, from memory, write down or type out the letters that you saw. All right, now I'm going to give you a poll. On which sequence were you most correct? The first one or the second one? All right. I think it's pretty clear that most folks got more of the second one correct. That's because the first one has more intrinsic difficulty because it's not grouped into meaningful learning units, right? Those are, I don't even know how many there are, like 12 different learning units. But the other one has 4 meaningful units that are grouped together. It's the same content, right? But the way it is grouped and managed is just easier in the second one, because we know WHO, IBM, ESL, USA, there are things that most of us have at least some familiarity with. The 5 of you that didn't get it, you have some interesting memories. You've got a great visual memory for learning discrete facts. So that's really impressive, very impressive. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing. So some things are harder than others. So some things we can do is we can structure our work and our content. We can provide student support, and we can have students support each other with peer support. So a few teaching techniques that can help. Note-taking pairs. If students are having to take notes, they're not all probably very good at it, and probably everybody picks up something that somebody else didn't get. So if you will occasionally stop and pair them together to work on it, that can be helpful. Dyadic essays, where they help each other learn to write essays and model essays, can be a great technique as well. And then analytic teams, where people take on different listening roles. Some are agreeers, some are questioners, some are criticizers during a given lecture, can be very helpful as well. And finally, a jigsaw, where students take content, divide it up into parts, learn it, and then teach each other, can be a useful technique as well. Our last one is germane load. And that is the idea that some teaching methods are more challenging for others. So they take away students' ability to process the information. So if I were trying to teach what is a triangle to people who've never seen it before, I could say something like a triangle is a polygon with 3 edges and 3 vertices. Or I could say this is a triangle, right? The way I teach it has some difficulty. And yes, absolutely, you can do them both. You can show this is a triangle and then tell them the definition. But there's clearly some more difficulty to the way I'm teaching it. I'm adding or subtracting difficulty. So when you have something you know is exceedingly hard, you've got to think about the easiest, or not the easiest, the most efficient or best way to teach that so students can learn it the best. So some things that don't help: too much text in an LMS, right? That is overwhelming for students, or too much text on the slides. If you're putting a bunch of bullet points and a lot of teeny tiny slides, reconsider, consider pictures, big text. I personally try never to drop below on main slides like 60-point font. I know people say 24. I try not to drop below 60. I do sometimes for like subtext, but for main text, I would never go this small. So what you're asking students to do when you have text like this is to choose between listening to you or reading the text. And they are probably going to start reading the text because they can read faster than you can talk. So that can add to their learning difficulty, and it makes them feel like they're drinking from a fire hose. So a few strategies: again, chunking, balancing methods, and practice and rehearsal. So some teaching techniques that can help: individual readiness tests, giving them tests before they come in to learn to have some baseline. Insights, resources, and applications, where you ask them for each of those. You say, what insights do you have? What resources do you need? What applications can you make to current content? That's a great technique. And even Team Jeopardy, where you give them retrieval practice. They're practicing and using that content, can be very helpful. The last one is extraneous load. When we have students in class in normal times, right, we have them there. We have them, right? They're there with us in the moment. It's contained. We're there in the same physical space at the same physical time. When they're at home learning, we don't have them, right? And they can be doing other things while they're trying to learn. Goodness knows I'm guilty of this too. I'm going to ask you to do another activity. We're a little tight on time. If you have to leave, I'll understand, but I'm going to try to get through it quickly. So I'm going to ask you, when I start, to count to 52 When you're done, see what time it is and write it down. So this doesn't seem to want to go. Oh, wait, it's going there. Huh. There we go. Okay, start counting. All right, I hope you got it by then. Now I'm going to ask you to say the alphabet twice. I'm just going to back this one up so I don't have to get it to start in the next one. Okay, go. Alphabet twice. All right, now I'm going to ask you to say the alphabet and the numbers, but I want you to alternate. One number, one letter. 1A, 2B, 3C, and so forth. Go when I say start. Go. Okay, I'm gonna stop. You're not done, are you? Probably, right? That's task switching. That is what happens when you try to switch tasks. Oh, and now it's not gonna let me go. There we go. How much efficiency did you lose when you task switched instead of doing one or the other? A lot? Yes, I see nodding. There is no such thing as multitasking, is the answer. There is only task switching. And when you switch task, the research says you can lose up to 40% efficiency. I'm not sure it's not more, but it's probably at least 40% efficiency. And that's what's going on with students when they're trying to do multiple things at once, when we don't have them in that same time, in the same shared space. I think we can help educate them, but we all need balance and support. And if we don't find it, we'll have balance. And we're out of time, so I'm gonna save, I'll do this real quick and then we'll save the questions for the end. Lack of deep processing is the last one. Deep processing is the level of processing spectrum of mental recall through analysis used. It is thinking very deeply about something. It requires semantic processing, how words work together to create meaning, which creates a stronger memory trace. So two great experts at deep processing are Martin and Saljo. They wanted to know why some students learn better than others. Equally smart people, some people just seem to learn better. And they asked students at a university to read substantial passages of prose. They looked at how they read the passages and what the meaning of the passages were. And they found that some students were surface learners and some were deep learners, or the strategies they used were surface and deep. Surface learning strategies focused on unrelated parts of the task. They tried to memorize the information. They were treating principles from examples as the same thing, principles and examples. They treated the task as an external imposition. But those deep learners related things to their own prior experiences. They looked at the difference between evidence and argument. They organized content into a coherent whole, and they tried to evaluate the article. They truly tried to grapple with the text and understand it and not just memorize it and pass the test. And they found that the link between the level of processing adopted and the level of understanding achieved cannot be overstated. So we can promote deep learning approaches that help students learn. And a few ways to do this are giving them some guidance and ground rules. Like you could get them all to agree to, when they study, put everything away, turn off the internet, right? When they're on Zoom, they only Zoom and they turn off their phones and all that. We can help them direct attention, and we can give them attention supports. So a few techniques: punctuated lectures, post-test analysis is a good one. Punctuated lectures are where you stop and say, what are you doing right now? Write it down. What are you thinking about? A post-test analysis asks them to guess what grade they're going to get, and then compare it, and then think about why they did or didn't get the grade they thought. A lecture wrapper, you're just asking them, what's the most important thing you learned? All right, so 3 common challenges: insufficient motivation, limited working memory, and lack of deep process skills. We can help students overcome these challenges. There are a lot of great techniques at the KP Cross Academy. If I do say so myself, I'd suggest checking it out. And I'll end with a Pat Cross quote. The task of the excellent teacher is to stimulate apparently ordinary people to unusual effort. The tough problem is not in identifying the winners, it is making winners out of ordinary people. And I think that's part of our job as teachers, to help everyone learn, to help everyone engage and do the hard work of learning. I want to say thanks for your time and attention and hard work, and say that I am more than happy to stick around for any questions that you might have. So only 3 minutes over. That's pretty good, right? Pretty good. So do we have some questions? Michael?
Yes, and I'll just echo, I know folks have to go to different meetings and things. Thanks everybody for coming. Yeah,
Okay.
I think what we can do, because
Thanks
we'll
for
have,
coming.
we've got some smaller numbers. So I think if we can maybe have people unmute, Faye, if you want to do that, then we can have people jump in. It's going to be hard with 75 or 80, but we have a handful. So
everyone now has access to unmute. If you want to have them raise their hand and call on them, that might make it a little more orderly.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I think, Lee, I saw your hand first. So if you want to jump in first.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good answer.
Let me stop sharing too. There, people, I see you.
So I teach a law class, and what I do, I teach the kids how to brief a case, which is a way of thinking very analytically and critically. And I put them in groups. So there's that group project element, and then the smarter leaders in the class can pull the others along. But sometimes it gets us in trouble because some of them are skating, right? And it's hard to identify doing the work, even though I make them all do the individual work and turn it in, and I look at it all. Then when it's time for the midterm or the final, they're surprised because they expect to be doing as well as they did with the group. And I think it leads to some frustration. And I'm not sure how to manage that, because I'm trying to do that group test taking kind of idea and the individual test taking idea. And I think when kids are lazy or they want the result without doing the work, I mean, I'm trying to sort of rewire them when their parents have said, yes, you're perfect and wonderful, you get that A no matter what. I'm being rude, but it's like the deal.
Yeah, no, I understand. And they've often skated through high school and college and made straight A's, and then they're in classes with people who all skated through high school and college with straight A's. So it's a different ballgame. So I get that. So one thing, I don't know how you're weighting the individual. You said you read and grade all the individual ones. I would consider making sure you weight those a lot more. Like those
Okay.
get 80% of the grade and the group score 20% of the grade, so that they start seeing that, you know, this isn't going to go. I mean, that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Okay.
The other thing is you could give them assessments along the way, but then that increases your workload, your grading load, right? And I recognize that we don't all have space for that. I mean, you know, I've got a class this semester, I think I've got 67 students. I'm not adding anything. Yeah, if I'm just straight up about it. So, but you could give some kind of assessment before the midterm or final, so they had a little bit more of a reality check kind of earlier on. But I think, you know, those are my two just off the bat suggestions, and I'd be happy to talk about it some other time if you'd like to reach out to me on email or something. I don't know that I have a lot more to offer, but I'm happy to chat about it.
Thank you.
Sure.
And Linda, I saw your hand too.
Yes, thank you. Well, first, thank you again so much. This is a very applicable session.
And good, thank you.
You know, my courses, I would think, are all active learning. They're for international grad students mostly who are serving as TAs or on a TA track, or international students working on pronunciation and lecturing and presentation skills. So I'll definitely check out the Cross Academy, but I'm looking for new video materials, streaming video that would have demonstrations of good teaching techniques, activities, you know, models that I can refresh my courses with. I have a lot of things, but they get very outdated.
Right.
And the second thing, just as a mention to colleagues here, that native English speaking students, usually undergrads from any department or major, are welcome as guests in my courses to interact with my students in discussions, cross-cultural issues, audience members, and feedback providers for presentations and speaking, listening activities like that. So, you know, all of that is very open to assist my students. So thank you so much.
Sure, thanks for coming. I'm so glad you were here, an expert. Yeah, we should have you talk. There's some Harvard videos, and Michael can probably point you to them. It's a Harvard group that's got some demonstrations of people in the classroom demonstrating different techniques. So that would be the first place I would check.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Actually, I do use the Derek Bach Center at Harvard, Patrick Wilson and others. But some of them are old too, but I'll take another look.
No, they've got some newer ones. There's some newer ones that they're kind of rolling out regularly. I've forgotten the name of it's got a name, but I can't remember it right now. I'll try to find it and shoot it over to Michael if I can remember it, or somebody there can search it or something. But they're showing people doing teaching live. So.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
I don't see any other hands, but if anybody else has questions, you should be able to unmute and ask if there's anything outstanding.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go back.
I got a little bit lost when you got to deep processing. And in spite of the fact that I have two monitors, I'm writing on one, I'm looking at you in the other. So at first I thought you said deprocessing. But I lost the definition, and it was one that made my ears perk up, but I just didn't get to write it down. And so I'm clearly not going to learn that. Can you
Well, I sure can, but I can also send my PowerPoint over to Michael and let him post it so that you can see all these things. I'm trying to get to it. My computer's actually slowed. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, okay, deep processing. One of the extreme ends of the level of processing spectrum of mental recall through analysis of language used, and it requires the use of semantic processing, how words work together to create meaning, which creates a stronger memory trace.
No wonder my ears pricked up. Okay, because I also am a lit teacher, so.
Okay.
All right, requires the, I didn't even, it's all right. I'm just looking at my typos here. The use, not the sue.
Well, you can see mine when I send
Okay, great.
I'm not always, it's funny. I'm an English person. I'm a journal editor, but I just still have typos. I'm just not going to be done about it. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for the session. It was very, very useful.
Sure. Thank you for coming. Y'all were just great. Great. It's nice to be back.
Maybe one more if somebody else has got one last one to end us out on.
I had a quick question. So I had my first semester recently. I teach leadership management. What I found most difficult was being accommodating to all the students. How much is too much accommodation? I understand with the mixture of the Zoom and in class, not in class, online, trying to be accommodating, I think really ended up causing more problems than anything else for me as the instructor. And then for them, they either were, I won't say ungrateful, except maybe that is the better word. They wanted everything handed to them rather than really engaging in the class and participating. So where do you draw the line on being too accommodating?
Right. That is it's a good question. It's also a really challenging question because there are different kinds of accommodation, right? And if somebody needs accommodation, like they need accommodations, they need bigger font or they need recorded lecture or whatever, I think I personally bend over backwards to accommodate in whatever way. If students have a learning disability or something like that, I'm like, what do you need? How can I help you? Just you let me know what I can do and I am there for you. It sounds like what you're talking about is a little bit more like the high flex approach. Like, are you going to come to class? Or are you going to take it online or something?
Correct.
Yeah, so that I am not sure of. Some of it depends on like what your institutional policies are. And some depends, I think, on your classroom. And I'm not entirely sure what your institution has said. Last semester, ours said if they wanted to be online, they're online. That's just the way it is. If they want to take it on Zoom, they can take it on Zoom. If they want to come to class, they can come to class. And as a teacher, you had to, if you were scheduled to teach on site, you had to be on site, even if everybody else was on Zoom, right? So,
I'm more, I apologize. I'm more talking about the accommodation, not disabilities. I understand that 100%. I'm more talking about the accommodations as in the support of the student, right? They're struggling with writing a research paper. So you give them an extended amount of, you extend their deadline so that they can take a little bit more time. They don't like, or the rubric isn't clear enough for them. So you take more time to develop a deeper, a more elaborate rubric for them. There's got to, I guess what I'm asking, and again, this may not be the right forum. It sounds like most people here have a lot of experience where I don't. But it sounds like it almost backfired where when a student was requesting assistance or requesting additional support within the course and you provide it to them, it backfires because now, I don't know, they don't understand the requirements. Now they found another reason why they can't do something. If that makes sense.
Right. I think, okay, first of all, I'd say I highly encourage you to talk to somebody at your teaching center because I think this is a longer conversation than we can have right here. Personally, Right now, if somebody wants extra time, I'm giving it to them. That's a personal decision. If they want extra time, I'm like, I don't even want to know why you need it. I'm happy to give it. Personally, I'm not redesigning rubrics for anybody. The rubric is what the rubric is. And if you need me to talk with you about it or something, I'm happy to talk with you. But there are some limits. I don't think you have to redesign all your materials in the classroom to accommodate people. And I don't know that you have to give them extra time. That's just something I'm perfectly willing to do, but I understand not everybody is. But I would highly encourage you to talk with somebody at your teaching center and say, here are my issues, you know, what is okay and what's not okay. Because I think that sounds like a fairly long conversation about, you know, here's what we can make modifications on, and here's what this is what it is, right? It is what it is, and that's the way it's going to be. But I do think you're right that you don't have to rewrite the whole course for them and all the packaged materials. But at the same time, I do think, and it sounds like you're doing this exactly right, and maybe to the point of, like you're saying, being a little too accommodating. But I do think right now, give people the benefit of the doubt. You know, this is not the time, in my mind, at least, we have to be rigorous, but we don't have to be just, I don't know, uncompassionate or inhumane, right? We need to understand that they may be sick and they may have people homesick and they may have all kind of issues going on. So I think you do have to find that balance. And I think that's going to take some thinking through and talking with some teaching professionals about how best to go about that.
Agreed.
Yeah, and I would add, certainly CT would be happy to have that conversation. I think the other thing that COVID has made trickier in kind of in the context of active learning is sometimes the nature of active learning, students need to struggle. They need to work through, you know, the activity. And students sometimes don't like that. Sometimes you hear on your course evaluations that they don't like to struggle in that kind of way. I think certainly some of our students at SMU aren't comfortable with that in a lot of ways, but we know they're going to have to face that in life. So it's good for them, even if they don't always like it. I think in the context of COVID with technology, mediation, all that, it is a little trickier to know where that line is. And I'm kind of with you, Claire, that, you know, right now, if a student needs some extra time or something, I might give it in a way that I wouldn't in a quote unquote normal situation. But yeah, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation about what we've seen from other faculty and where you can kind of find that balance. And it will vary by department. It'll vary by the types of students, graduate versus undergraduate, majors versus general education, right? There's a huge spectrum that I think also probably provides context to those discussions. But I think all that to say, a lot of these are not easy yes/no answers. Right. And that's where, to put a plug in, Claire and I both believe in the ability of teaching centers to help. And that's where I think a perfect example of where teaching centers can be useful. But all that to say, I know we're about 15 minutes over. Thank you everybody for coming again. Thank you, Claire. I think this is really beneficial. It's almost like a mini TES before we start the spring semester. So we really appreciate the time. I know you're called to do a lot of these kind of things, and we appreciate you coming back again.
I'm delighted. Y'all were great friends. So known Michael for a long time.
we won't talk how long.
Just a minute. So it's fun being here. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.
Coming and staying.